Hello, everyone, and welcome to this lunch talk. In this lunch talk, we will be talking about Obvia and the world of open source software in general. My name is Tedi Moci. I'm a software developer for an Albanian company called Creatix. And more importantly, I'm also growth hacker for the Obvia framework, which is a new JavaScript framework that we have actually launched as open source. And during this talk, I will explain a little bit about Obvia's history, how it came to be and what our mission is, but also a bit more about the world of open source in general, so why you should contribute to such projects. Then we will talk a little bit about working with Obvia itself, so some concept and maybe some example, or I can show you just a piece of code. And of course, maybe also working with GitHub, especially if you are working on a shared repository, an open source repository where many people are contributing, although I will skim through this part a little bit more quickly because I think there's enough material on the internet for that to see more by yourself. At the end, we will also have like a Q&A, so feel free to ask any questions that you might have as well. But regarding Obvia itself, so as I said, I'm working at Creatix, and this project was in development since 2016. And we as a company have a decade-long experience in web and software development and have mainly developed single-page business applications. And since we are in this business, we decided to create a framework that would facilitate our work. In 2021, we released it we released Obvia as an open source project with the aim of making web development obviously easy. Currently, we have our own webpage and we have our communities in various social media. And our current aim is to grow this community and have more people who would like to contribute to this framework and to this project with various means, either through writing code or finding bugs, of writing documentation, or any sort of help would be very appreciated, of course. This is our website. It's called obviajs.com. You can go there anytime and look at materials, look at our documentation, look at our examples, or read more in depth about this framework. And all the information that I will explain in this talk, you can find there with a bit more detail, of course. But the question will rise, of course, like, why should one contribute to open source software? I mean, after all, open source itself is not, by definition, is not a commercial software. It's not a commercial solution. It's a project that is open for anyone to use and open for anyone to contribute. The most important thing about open source software is that it enables technology. Almost all the things, all the tools or the frameworks that you are using are developed as, or either as open source or have culminated as results of open source development. For example, imagine if programming languages were not open for anyone to use, but you actually had to pay someone a fee to use Java or JavaScript or C++ or any other language. Of course, fewer and fewer people would be able to develop software. So since these are free and open for anybody, more and more people can join. Secondly, this effort is a collaborative effort for software development. So there's a community of contributors that are able to maintain, improve, and develop and share ideas together. And since more people are contributing to a project, then the code also has a higher quality because more people are able to inspect it and give suggestions on how to improve. Of course, it's easier to distribute and be adopted by more people, the more people use something, of course. And it's easier and more effective and more efficient to develop. And beyond this, there is also the open source business model and the services and support, where, for example, you use an open source software and you create a business around it, or you can sell services and support around it. For example, the Android technology in the phones is open source, and Samsung, for example, uses it in their phones, and they are selling the phone as a piece of equipment while using the open source technology on it. That's one example. What does a developer gain from contributing to open source software? Of course, the scope of contributing to such projects goes, I would say, a little bit beyond commercial gain. It's more about improving your skills and your experience as a software developer. And first of all, you get real world software development experience. You are not just learning or doing a project for your class, but you are actually contributing to a project that is real and will be used by people. And many people are actually going to contribute and look at it and actually use it. You will gain exposure as a software developer, especially within the open source community. You can sort of build a name for yourself and gain experience from it. You can get help from a dedicated and encouraging community, especially when you are writing code. Many experienced developers are going to review it and maybe give you ideas or give you help or just share with you their experience in order to help you improve. Of course, you are going to all bond with the other developers. And as a philosophy, as a philosophy of open source projects, as open source software in general, is to leave things better than you found them. So to some extent, when you are contributing to an open source software, you are not only developing yourself and becoming better than you were before, let's say, as a developer, but at the same time, the project is also being improved. And after your contribution, it might be better than it was before. Maybe you find a bug, or maybe you fix something, or maybe you contribute to better documentation. So of course, this will make the project better in the long run. These are some examples of open source software and open source technologies. From Android, as I said, Linux, Mozilla Firefox, Apache OpenOffice, VLC Media Player, MySQL, WordPress, and now also Obvia is joining as an open source JavaScript framework. But let's focus a little bit more on Obvia now. So I will explain you some basic concepts on how to work with it. And at the same time, bear in mind that most of these things you can also find on our website. So if you want to read more or find more details about it, you can certainly look there for more explanations. This will be a basic introduction and talk about some basic concepts. So first of all, Obvia as a framework is a JavaScript framework for developing single-page applications. It is made of the UI components. It is made of one application, which is formed from applets. We are using general use libraries such as binding, caching, remote array, ArrayX, browser utils, p3com, decorator utils, etc., and also code generation utilities, which you can actually check more in detail on our website what they all do. But all you have to remember is that there is the application, there are the applets, and this is all formed of UI components. What is a component? A component is a JavaScript class that accepts properties and returns elements that describes how a section of the user interface will appear. So this is a building block of every Obvia application, and it is a concept that is also used in other frameworks as well. Like the component is widely used in web development. So the application is usually represented as app.js, and it keeps the list of it keeps basically the list of behaviors and routes and events them to the proper behavior implementation. Then there is an applet. So each application is formed of smaller applets that are self-contained functional and visual units of this application. Then there are the behaviors. So a behavior is the way that an application handles different events. So different events can expose the same behavior, or the same event can expose many behaviors. What is an event, for example? It can be a mouse click. So you say, okay, when the mouse clicks this component, then your app must react in a certain way, must do something. It can display a message or change the page or do something that is basically an event and a behavior. Binding, through binding, like whenever the properties of the context objects change, so do the component properties. And the cache, which stores data on the browser, which actually makes sure that the user does not fetch information from the server every time they need, but this information is actually saved in their cache, which actually is what makes single page applications generally faster and more efficient for the users to use. What are the advantages of Obvia and why you should use Obvia? Um, First of all, as I said, it is ideal for the development of single page applications, which by themselves are more dynamic and more, let's say, pretty in uh, in asterisks for the user. It has a component-based architecture, so components themselves are like small independent units, and this allows for fewer dependencies and more flexibility for the developer. Memo is DOM, which is used through components that accept attributes and describe the appearance of a UI section. Scope CSS, which allows the developer to write specific CSS for each component in order to change the styling of each component and how it should look. And of course, it facilitates asynchronous programming, which allows for a better user experience, of course. For all these concepts and for all these things that I'm mentioning, I will show an example in the end, which you can actually see how it happens in a real application. So why Obvia, especially for developers and especially for users? First of all, it's easy and efficient to use and does not require any installations or any extra installations. It has an affinity towards business applications. So this has mainly been developed by Creatix. And since we are in the field of making business applications, we have used Obvia for this process, and it is optimized for our processes and for our work. But anybody that joins the project and sort of give it a different direction, or maybe implement something that can make it easier for another form of application. It gives a proper structure for maintaining complex single page applications. It avoids the usage of the virtual DOM and the drawbacks associated with it. For novice developers, it's a simple and intuitive implementation and does not rely on HTML structures. And for experienced developers, it's a new and exciting project where their input and vision can directly influence the development of this framework. Then I will talk a little bit about contributing to the project. So I don't know how knowledgeable you are about GitHub or how much you've worked with GitHub, especially when you have a shared repository. This is our repository, so it's github.com/obviajs/obvia, where you will see all the code. And what you usually have to do is you just sign into the GitHub. You have to fork the repository to create a copy into your own account. You have to clone the fork into your own computer. You have to navigate to your local repository. You have to add the project repository as the upstream in order to pull the latest changes. And you have to create a new branch, and then you are working on your own branch to implement changes. On our GitHub, you will check our guidelines and our rules. So if you want to fix something, or you have found a bug, or just want to contribute to the project, you can follow these guidelines and make this contribution. Of course, you can also write me as well, or any of the people involved, and talk more in detail about this as well. But how to work with Obvia, this is a quick example that can also be found on the website, and I will also show you the code after this call. So first of all, you are to fork and clone the repository in your computer. I personally use XAMPP, so I keep it in the htdocs folder. And normally you can check it out, like if everything works, you can go to localhost/obvia/index.html and just view the examples. So in order to build the project, we need to reference the libraries that are used in the framework and in the directory. So usually this is the structure that I used for the simple project. So I have one HTML file, which is the index.html, one JavaScript file, which I'm calling Obvia.js, and one CSS file, which will be the global CSS and will be the global styling for the whole project. Then we have to use separate applets. So as I said, each application is formed of applets. So now we only have one, which is called the main one. And each applet will have the JSON, which I'm calling main.json, which will describe how this applet is going to look in the UI, and the JavaScript file, which will give the behaviors and that are mapped to the certain events. So what I've done is a simple to-do app with a simple text input that you can write something and it will show as a list. And you can just click on the X to mark it as done or not. This can be found at obviajs.com/examples, and you can try to implement it yourself. So what we are looking for is contributions of any form, from simple feedback to ideas, bug reports, of course, financial support as well. We have our own PayPal, but also contributions in terms of code or fixes, various fixes. Developers that are interested in using, maintaining, and developing the code even further. And since this is a small project, as I said, the input of various developers, especially that come outside of our company, can help transform the framework into something that can be used for even bigger or even other purposes. And we have our social media channels. So at obviajs.com/community, we have our Discord, our subreddit, a meetup, Twitter. So you can just join, especially the Discord, and write me and the other developers anytime. If you have questions or if you have ideas or just want to chat about development in general, you can talk to me anytime. So I would like to thank you all for the participation and listening to this talk. And I would like to invite you to ask any questions that you might have.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to ask in related to Obvia. So is Obvia a company or even a company, or is it like alongside CreateX based in Vienna, or is it based in Albania?
No, Obvia is not a company. It's purely this project, the
Okay.
open source
So it's
project.
just the open.
It's not based anywhere. So as a company, we developed the framework, and initially we used it purely for our own purposes. Like we were using it to develop our own software applications.
Mhm.
And then at some point we decided, okay, since this is helping us and we are actually developing it quite well and are using it for our own purposes, maybe we can release it as an open source project for more people to use it and give feedback and contribute to it as well. So this is not related to the company. This is free and open
Okay.
for anyone to use anywhere.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you guys are interested, I can also show you the code as well. So this is the one that I was mentioning. So it has the index.html and the obvious.js files, which are basically a standard files that every application should have. And where the thing happens is at the main JS and main JSON. So in the JSON, you create basically the user interface. So it has one component text input, which says what needs to be done. And then one component repeater, which repeats the same section of the UI as many times that it is needed. It is formed of one button and one label. And in main.js, you define the behaviors of this applet. So for example, when you say applet add behavior, you say, okay, for the search form, once you hit the key, you call the function add to do, which will add a new to do to the list. So how it works is if I'm going here, this is the text input. If I go here and I click have a Zoom call, it will show here, and you can click this button or unclick it. If you add something more, it will show something else. So this thing is a repeater, and each repeater has one button and one label. How it looks for a bigger application or what we do in the company is something that I'm working on right now. It looks like this basically. So each of these things is an applet, and each of these things is basically a component that actually builds this applet. Perhaps like it can help to illustrate you better how it works and how it should look. This is also the code that I'm working on currently. So all of these things are applets, basically. Any other questions or any other feedback or ideas?
Hi, Tedi. Morning.
Hi.
My name is Cecilio. I work for CodeFactory.
Yes.
I was watching your talk. I came a little bit later than the beginning. I just have like two questions in the sense of the framework. As I can see here, it's JavaScript framework, so it's a front-end framework, no?
Yes.
Right. So if you could compare that with any other framework already in the market? It does the same thing?
I mean, normally all the frameworks technically do the same thing.
Exactly,
so Vue, of course, there's Vue, there's React, there's Angular, Svelte.
Yeah.
But first of all, what Obvia offers is a certain level of ease to it, and it is something that we have used to train, for example, young developers as well, because we believe it is more intuitive to understand. Like as a developer, everyone has their own preference of framework. And personally, when I use a framework, the first thing I choose is how well it clicks in my head or how well I can imagine working with this. Like the more intuitive something is, the easier it is to work with it. So regarding this, yes, it is. We believe it's more efficient and easy to learn. At the same time, it is mainly developed for maintaining a single page application. So usually other frameworks can be a bit more generic in what they offer. So you can use them for this purpose, or you can use them for other purposes like a normal application, non-single page application. But this one gives like a certain structure and a certain way of developing purely single page applications that maybe is a bit more intuitive and properly structured for developers.
Okay, I see. Does Obvia have already something similar to there is hold on a minute. There is a native script. Do you have something similar to native script for Obvia? That from the application you create from Obvia, you can already transform into apps for Android and iOS?
Not really, not at the moment.
Not really,
This
right.
is purely
I guess
for the web.
Right, it's purely for the web. Okay. Okie dokie. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other input? Like on the website, you can also go to like get started, and here you can read basically the documentation and the concepts that I explained and everything more in depth. Also pieces of code and also the example which I already showed you. We also have our channel on YouTube, so you can also check there like actual implementations too.
That's actually great. That was going to be my next question. Sorry, if you had already some tutorials to show how to build it, like your first Obvia application. That's actually great.
This is basically it. Like this is the to-do list that I showed you. And as a personal recommendation for new developers who want to get into the framework, I would suggest creating a button here that deletes one item from the list, like a delete button, so to say. Like that would probably be the next step to actually developing something on your own beyond what you can already see.
Sure. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. You're welcome.